A single decision almost nobody notices can quietly divide two lives. Picture two people standing in the same city. They earn similar paychecks. They complain about the same rising prices. They dream about the same better future. 5 years later, one is leading a team, buying a home, and planning vacations. The other still tells himself that next year will be different. What happened? Most people blame luck. Some blame talent. Others blame opportunity. But hidden beneath all those explanations is something much smaller, and far easier to overlook. It isn't a dramatic breakthrough. It's a quiet habit repeated when almost nobody is watching. This is the story of one ordinary man who discovered that the biggest turning point in his life wasn't a new job, a wealthy relative, or a winning lottery ticket. It began with a decision so ordinary that nobody around him even noticed. Yet within months, the direction of his entire future had begun to shift. His name was Daniel. At 34, his life had settled into a routine that felt impossible to escape. Every weekday followed the same script. The alarm rang. He hurried through breakfast. Sat in traffic. Worked all day inside a warehouse processing shipments. Drove home exhausted. Ate whatever was easiest. Scrolled endlessly through his phone. Promised himself tomorrow would be different. Then repeated everything again. Months disappeared. Then years. Nothing terrible happened. That was the problem. His life wasn't falling apart. It simply wasn't moving forward. His apartment looked exactly the same as it had 4 years earlier. The same worn-out couch. The same peeling paint near the kitchen window. The same stack of unopened books he kept promising himself he'd read someday. Friends from school slowly disappeared into lives that looked impossible to compare. One launched a small business. Another became a project manager. Someone else moved overseas. Every success story felt like another reminder that time seemed to move faster for everyone except him. Daniel wasn't lazy. Anyone who worked beside him knew that. He rarely arrived late. He volunteered for overtime. He covered shifts when others called in sick. Managers trusted him. Coworkers respected him. But respect wasn't paying his bills. Hard work was keeping him alive. It wasn't building a future. Late one evening, after another 10-hour shift, he opened his banking app while waiting for the bus. After rent, utilities, food, fuel. The remaining balance was so small it almost looked like a mistake. He locked his phone without saying a word. Not because he was surprised. Because he had seen the same numbers too many times before. That weekend, he visited his father. Age had slowed the old carpenter considerably. The workshop that once echoed with the sound of saws and hammers now sat unusually quiet. Dust rested on unfinished furniture. The smell of fresh wood still filled the air. His father smiled when Daniel arrived. But parents notice things their children hope to hide. "You look tired." "I'm fine." "You've been saying that for years." Daniel laughed. Or at least tried to. After dinner, the two sat outside watching the evening sky fade into darkness. For several minutes neither of them spoke. Then his father pointed toward an old oak tree standing near the edge of the property. "When I planted that tree, it barely reached my knee." Daniel nodded. "I remember. People laughed because it grew so slowly." His father smiled. "But trees aren't measured after one season." He looked directly at Daniel. "Neither are people." The sentence stayed with him long after he drove home. The following Monday changed everything. Not because something extraordinary happened. Because something unexpectedly ordinary did. During lunch break, Daniel found himself sitting beside a retired logistics consultant named Victor. Victor occasionally visited the warehouse to advise management on improving operations. Everyone knew him. Calm. Patient. Always carrying a notebook. Never rushing. Never complaining. Daniel finally asked the question that had quietly bothered him for weeks. "Can I ask you something?" Victor closed his notebook. "Of course. How did your career take off?" Victor smiled. I expected a much more complicated question. Daniel shrugged. It feels complicated. Victor leaned back. It wasn't one opportunity. It wasn't one promotion. It certainly wasn't talent. So what was it? Victor looked toward the warehouse floor where forklifts moved in every direction. Most people finish work and recover from the day. I finished work and invested in the next one. Daniel frowned. I don't understand. Victor picked up a paper napkin and drew two small circles. These represent two people. He shaded one of them. Same salary. Same age. Same education. Then he added a tiny line extending from one circle. This person spends 90 minutes every day becoming more valuable. He left the second circle untouched. This one doesn't. Daniel stared at the drawing. It doesn't look like much. Victor nodded. Exactly. That's why almost everyone ignores it. He folded the napkin and handed it over. The biggest changes are usually invisible while they're happening. Daniel slipped it into his pocket. What should someone do during those 90 minutes? Victor smiled again. Wrong question. Daniel blinked. The first question is whether you'll protect those 90 minutes at all. He stood, checked his watch, and headed back toward the warehouse doors. Before leaving, he turned around one last time. If you're serious, meet me Wednesday morning. 6 o'clock. Bring a notebook. Daniel almost laughed. 6 in the morning? Victor simply nodded. If your future isn't worth waking up for, it probably isn't worth wishing for either. Daniel watched him walk away. For the rest of the afternoon, he couldn't stop thinking about one uncomfortable realization. He had spent years searching for a bigger opportunity. Maybe what he actually needed was a better use of ordinary time. Daniel almost ignored the invitation. His alarm was already early enough. Adding another hour sounded less like self-improvement and more like punishment. Tuesday night became a negotiation inside his own head. You've had a long day. You deserve more sleep. You can start next week. The excuses sounded reasonable. That's what made them dangerous. The alarm rang at 5:15. For several seconds, he stared at the ceiling. His hand reached toward the phone almost automatically. Then he remembered something. Nothing in his life had changed because he kept choosing comfort over intention. He sat up. The room was silent. Outside, the neighborhood still slept. Streetlights reflected off rain-soaked sidewalks. No traffic. No notifications. No noise. Just space. For the first time in years, Daniel wasn't reacting to the day. He was meeting it before it arrived. Victor was already waiting when Daniel reached the small coffee shop. A notebook rested beside a steaming cup. So, Victor said with a smile. You actually came. I almost didn't. I know. Everyone almost doesn't. Daniel laughed. Victor opened his notebook and wrote one sentence across the top of the page. Value determines opportunity. He slid the notebook across the table. People think they get paid for working hard. They don't. They get paid for the problems they can solve. Daniel read the sentence twice. I already work hard. I know. But if tomorrow someone replaces you, how difficult would that be? The question landed harder than Daniel expected. He knew the answer. Someone else could probably learn his job within a few weeks. Victor continued. If you want a different future, become difficult to replace. That single sentence changed how Daniel viewed every hour of his life. Until then, free time had always meant recovery. Now it looked like unused potential. Victor drew 3 boxes. The first box read, Learn. The second, Practice. The third, Reflect. Every morning, he explained, protect 90 minutes. 30 minutes learning. 30 minutes applying. 30 minutes thinking. Most people only consume information. They rarely use it. And almost never stop to improve it. Daniel filled page after page with notes. Not because the ideas were complicated. Because they felt obvious. Obvious enough that he'd ignored them for years. That afternoon he went home and made a decision. No grand announcement. No motivational social media post. No promise to everyone he knew. Just one quiet commitment. Tomorrow. He would begin. The first week felt heavier than he expected. His body resisted every morning. His mind became surprisingly creative. You worked overtime. You can skip one day. You'll make it up later. Every excuse sounded logical. But Daniel discovered something important. Discipline rarely argues loudly. It simply waits for a decision. Some mornings he barely understood what he was reading. He chose supply chain management because it connected naturally with the warehouse where he already worked. Free online courses became his classroom. His kitchen table became his desk. Coffee replaced excuses. Notebook pages slowly filled with diagrams, formulas, and ideas. Progress was almost invisible. Which made it easy to doubt. 3 weeks passed. Nothing happened. No promotion. No compliments. No dramatic breakthrough. Only another completed lesson. Another page of notes. Another morning kept. That's when most people quit. Not because the work is impossible. Because improvement happens quietly before it becomes visible. Around the 4th week, something unexpected changed. Daniel stopped fighting the alarm. His body adapted. The mornings no longer felt like punishment. They felt protected. Instead of rushing through life, he had created a small island of uninterrupted focus. The world outside remained chaotic. Those 90 minutes belonged entirely to him. For the first time in years. He felt in control. Learning soon became application. While reviewing inventory reports at work, Daniel noticed the same mistakes appearing every month. Products were frequently misplaced. Stock counts rarely matched deliveries. Employees wasted hours correcting simple errors. Most workers complained. Daniel became curious. During lunch breaks he quietly experimented with spreadsheets he'd been building at home. He organized inventory data differently. Created color-coded tracking sheets. Simplified reports managers normally avoided reading. Nobody asked him to. Nobody paid him. But every morning had taught him the same lesson. Become useful before asking for opportunity. One Friday afternoon, his supervisor noticed Daniel comparing shipment records. "What are you working on?" Daniel hesitated. "Just, an easier way to track inventory." The supervisor looked over his shoulder. Within minutes, several warehouse employees gathered around. Questions filled the room. "Can this calculate shortages automatically? Will it track delayed deliveries? Can it reduce paperwork?" Daniel nodded. "I think so." The spreadsheet wasn't perfect. But it solved a real problem. And real problems attract attention. The following Monday, warehouse management requested a demonstration. Daniel's heart pounded as he connected his laptop. He wasn't presenting years of experience. He was presenting 90-minute mornings. Slide by slide. Report by report. He explained the system. The room stayed unusually quiet. When he finished, the operations manager leaned back in his chair. "How long have you been working on this?" Daniel answered honestly. "About 2 months." The manager raised an eyebrow. "After work?" "No. Before it." Silence. Then a smile slowly spread across the manager's face. "Interesting. Very interesting." The meeting lasted less than 20 minutes. Daniel walked back onto the warehouse floor expecting life to continue exactly as before. It didn't. People who had never spoken to him before suddenly asked questions. "Where did you learn Excel? Did someone train you? Have you done this kind of work before?" His answer never changed. "I've just been studying a little every morning." Most smiled politely. A few looked impressed. Some looked skeptical. Because consistent effort is easy to admire. And surprisingly difficult to imitate. A week later, Daniel received an email asking him to meet with human resources. His first thought wasn't excitement. It was worry. Had he broken a company policy? Was the spreadsheet unauthorized? Had he overstepped? He knocked on the office door. Inside sat the HR manager, the operations director, and his supervisor. The atmosphere was relaxed. The operations director spoke first. "We've been reviewing your inventory system." Daniel waited. "We're expanding our logistics planning team next quarter." Another pause. "We think you'd be a good fit." For a moment, Daniel wasn't sure he had heard correctly. The director continued. "It comes with additional training. A new title. And a salary increase." Daniel looked down at his hands. Only a few months earlier, those same hands had been holding a phone while scrolling through videos every evening, convincing himself he was too tired to improve his life. Now, those quiet mornings had begun speaking for him. Without realizing it, he had become someone different. Not because of one opportunity. Because of hundreds of ordinary decisions. That evening Daniel called Victor. "I got the position." Victor didn't sound surprised. "I was wondering when you'd call. I kept waiting for some big breakthrough." Victor laughed. "People misunderstand breakthroughs. They imagine fireworks. They're usually just the visible result of hundreds of invisible mornings." Daniel smiled. "I almost quit during the first month." "I know. Almost everyone does." Victor paused before asking one final question. "So, what happens tomorrow morning?" Daniel answered without hesitation. "I wake up." Victor smiled. "Exactly. Success doesn't end the routine. It protects it." Months became a year. The new position challenged Daniel in ways the warehouse never had. He managed projects. Analyzed data. Presented reports. Solved problems that once seemed far beyond his abilities. Yet one habit never changed. Before emails. Before meetings. Before deadlines. He protected 90 minutes that belonged to his future. Sometimes he learned new software. Sometimes he studied leadership. Sometimes he simply sat quietly with a notebook, reviewing yesterday's mistakes and planning today's priorities. Those sessions rarely felt dramatic. Most mornings ended without any feeling of accomplishment. But that was the lesson. Transformation doesn't announce itself. It accumulates. Like water shaping stone. Like interest growing in an investment account. Like a tree adding another ring beneath its bark. Nothing appears different. Until one day everything is. Years later, new employees often asked Daniel for career advice. They expected him to reveal a secret shortcut. Maybe an influential mentor. Maybe a lucky opportunity. Maybe a perfect strategy. Instead, he usually asked them one question. "What do your first 90 minutes belong to?" Most looked confused. Some laughed. A few understood immediately. Because your calendar quietly reveals your priorities. Your habits quietly reveal your future. And your future rarely arrives by accident. It arrives disguised as today's routine. Here's something most people never realize. Every person receives roughly the same 24 hours. The difference isn't found inside the clock. It's found inside the choices surrounding it. Small choices seem harmless because their consequences are invisible. Sleeping an extra hour feels insignificant. Skipping one workout feels harmless. Ignoring one lesson feels unimportant. And that's exactly why habits become destiny. No single decision changes your life. Thousands of them do. One after another. Quietly. Patiently. Until eventually your life begins reflecting what you've repeatedly practiced. Not what you've repeatedly wished for. Maybe you're waiting for confidence before starting. Confidence usually arrives after action. Not before it. Maybe you're waiting until life becomes less busy. Life has always been busy. Maybe you're hoping motivation will suddenly appear. Motivation is unpredictable. Routine is dependable. The people who seem extraordinarily disciplined often aren't relying on motivation at all. They've simply reduced the number of decisions they need to make. They've chosen their priorities in advance. If there's one lesson hidden inside Daniel's story, it's this. Your future isn't built during the moments everyone applauds. It's built during the quiet hours no one notices. When no one's watching. When no one's encouraging you. When quitting would be easy. Those moments rarely look important. Until years later. When you realize they quietly became the foundation of everything you've achieved. So tomorrow morning. Before reaching for your phone. Before the world begins demanding your attention. Ask yourself one simple question. What can I do today that my future self will thank me for? Then spend just 90 uninterrupted minutes doing exactly that. Not because 90 minutes will magically change your life. But because the person you become by protecting those 90 minutes will. And that person may be closer than you think. The future you're hoping for isn't waiting behind a lucky break. It may already be waiting. On the other side of tomorrow morning.